Good morning, everyone. Sorry for keeping you up quite so long. I said before coming to Brussels that if I couldn't get adequate safeguards for Britain in a new European treaty, then I wouldn't agree to it. What is on offer isn't in Britain's interests, so I didn't agree to it. Let me explain why this matters. Of course, we want the Eurozone countries to come together and to solve their problems. But we should only allow that to happen inside the European Union treaties if there are proper protections for the single market and for other key British interests. Without those safeguards, it is better not to have a treaty within a treaty, but to have those countries make their arrangements separately. That is what is now going to happen. Britain's interests in the European Union, keeping markets open, free trade, selling our goods and services with rules over which we have a major say, all those things are protected. They don't change. But this new round of integration and special powers and surrenders of sovereignty for European countries and others that want to join the euro, they will be carried on outside the European Union treaty. So we will not be presenting this new treaty, when it's agreed, to our Parliament. It will not involve Britain. Of course, while there were always dangers with agreeing a treaty within a treaty, there are also risks with others going off and forming a separate treaty, and we should acknowledge that. So we will insist that the EU institutions, the Court, the Commission, that they work for all 27 nations of the European Union. Indeed, those institutions are established by the treaty, and that treaty is still protected. Let me make a final point. The decisions taken here tonight all flow from one thing: the fact there is a single currency in Europe, the euro. Britain is out of it and will remain out of it. Other countries are in it and are having to make radical changes, including giving up sovereignty to try and make it work. The difference between the ins and the outs, those in the euro and those out of the euro, has inevitably created some tensions within the European Union. Now, there are arrangements in the EU treaties to allow different countries to do different things, but these have always been accompanied by adequate safeguards within the treaties. When we can't be given those safeguards in the treaty, it is better this is done by intergovernmental arrangements outside the treaty and outside the institutions of the European Union. That is what will happen, and that is what is in Britain's national interests. Those countries that sign this treaty and the agreements they've made tonight for coordinating their budgets and making sure there's more surveillance of what they do and the fiscal integration that they need, we wish them well because we want the Eurozone to sort out its problems, to achieve that stability and growth that all of Europe, Britain included, needs. We wish them well in that regard, and the agreements they've made tonight, some of those may indeed help them to do that. But the key question for Britain was, do you allow that to happen within the European Union treaties if you're not happy with the safeguards that you're given? I wasn't prepared to agree that treaty, to take it to my Parliament in that way, and that is why I rejected signing this treaty today. The right thing for Britain, a tough decision, but the right one. Some time for questions. Nick.
Nick Watt from The Guardian. Prime Minister, can I just ask you, you said there is a risk in the decision that you've taken today. Is not the greatest risk that the Eurogroup, under the Maastricht Treaty, under the accession treaties of member states that have joined since then, that group has got to grow, and that because financial services regulation is decided by QMV, that group could become a battering ram and they could force through financial regulations against our wishes? And secondly, are you not concerned that you're reviving that 19th century Tory tradition of splendid isolationism?
Well, on the issue of financial services, I mean, financial services are a matter for the single market. The single market remains the key part of the European Union treaty that we are signed up to. And these other countries now are having to go off separately from the European Union in order to create their new treaties. So we've got to work hard to safeguard the single market, financial services, making sure we complete the single market. That is still the job of the Commission, of the Court, of the institutions of the European Union that we belong to. As I said, of course, there were dangers of allowing the treaty within the treaty, but there are also, of course, risks from other countries going off in the way that they have. I think, though, Britain should be relaxed about this for this reason. There is variable geometry, different groups in Europe. There always has been. Britain is an absolutely key central member of NATO, but we're not in the Schengen Borders Organisation. We're a key member of the single market. We drive change in the single market, but we're not in the euro. And I'm glad we're not in the euro. And so I think the idea of Europe being more of a network, where you choose the organisations you join and you choose those organisations you don't join, is actually a way that Britain can get what we want and what we need in Europe. We're never going to join the euro. We're never going to give up the sort of sovereignty that these countries are having to give up in order to enter a fiscal union. So in some ways, the fact they're going to do this in a separate treaty without actually, distorting the European Union treaty itself, in many ways, given we couldn't get those safeguards, perhaps it's a better outcome. Sky News.
Prime Minister, what we now have de facto is a two-speed Europe. I think you'd have to agree that very much, with a much bigger inner core, and potentially Britain looks weaker within that European Union because of the reasons that Nick has just cited. What you haven't done is repatriated or taken back any powers. Isn't it time to consult both Parliament and the British people in a referendum on whether you should do that, presumably with the ultimate outcome that if the British people so choose, Britain could withdraw from the EU altogether?
Well, I think what we've always had is a Europe of multiple facets, if you like, many different speeds. As I said, at the heart of NATO, at the heart of the single market, not in the single currency, not in the Schengen. That, to me, reflects our interests. It's good that we've got our own economic policy, our own interest rates, our own ability to deal with the very real problems we face in our economy. It's good that we're at the heart of NATO. That helps us punch above our weight in the world. But frankly, am I pleased I'm not in Schengen? Am I happy that my borders aren't open for everyone to cross? Yes, I am happy I'm not in Schengen. And I'm happy I'm not in the single currency. Yes, I am. So that sort of Europe, I think Britain can maximise her influence, make sure we get what we need from Europe. On the issue of the referendum, I've always been very clear. Anything that involves Parliament or government giving up powers that you have and passing them to another body, you shouldn't do that without asking the British people in a referendum. And we've legislated to make that happen. As I say, one of the consequences of what has happened with the Eurozone countries creating their own new treaty to put in place these very tough changes in terms of challenging their sovereignty, that's going to happen outside the European Union. So that means we won't be presenting a treaty to Parliament. This is not going to be a treaty that Britain is signed up to, and so I don't think that issue arises. Mr. Watson.
Ian Watson, BBC News. First of all, can I just ask if you're disappointed that there wasn't a treaty of all 27 countries, and were you surprised that your concessions on safeguarding the City of London, for example, weren't actually given by the other member states? Secondly, although you've mentioned Schengen and other arrangements, what we have here is United Kingdom and Hungary on one side, and virtually all the other countries potentially elsewhere. Is there not a danger that, in practice, what has happened is that the rest of the EU has neutralised the British veto?
Well, no, what's happened is you've got Hungary, the Czech Republic, Sweden, Britain, all staying outside of this thing for the time being. We'll see who will join. Of course, every other member of the European Union is actually contractually obliged to join the euro. And that's going to be quite difficult for some of them, because in some countries you've got 80–90% of people opposed to joining the euro. In Britain's case, we have an absolutely proper copper-bottomed cast-iron opt-out where we don't have any obligation to join the euro. So, as I say, I came here wanting one of either of two outcomes, either the safeguards that made a treaty within a treaty, a new complex structure within the European Union, complex legal structure that made that safe, or, if we couldn't have that, then allow the others to go off in a treaty of their own and make sure that the European Union is maintained as about a single market and the institutions that involves. So either of those outcomes, to me, was acceptable. We had to just pursue very doggedly what is in the British national interest. A treaty within a treaty without safeguards wasn't right for Britain. It's not easy when you're in a room with many other people who all want to press ahead, who all say, forget about your safeguards, forget about your interests, let's all just sign up to this thing together. It's sometimes the right thing to say, I'm afraid I cannot do that, it's not in our national interest, I don't want to put that in front of my Parliament because I don't think I could recommend it with a clear conscience, and so I'm going to say no and I'm going to exercise the veto. That is effectively what I did. Channel 4 News.
Prime Minister, having seen what you've seen during the night, how confident are you that this other grouping, 17 plus, will come to some kind of agreement that will fix the euro? And if they do, how confident are you that the markets will not then turn on the pound to find a weak victim in all this?
Well, in terms of fixing the problems of the euro, I think there are three absolutely key issues, and I think they've made some progress on each of them. In the short term, you've got to have that firewall of money to stop contagion. You've got to have the recapitalisation of Europe's banks, and you've got to have decisive solutions in terms of Greece. And on those short-term measures, they're still not complete, but they have made some progress. On the second issue that needs to be fixed, having some clearer fiscal rules so that countries can't get into the trouble that they've got into in the past. Clearly, they've made some progress on that. That is the surrender of quite a lot of sovereignty, giving up quite a lot of power, budgets sometimes being fixed more in Brussels than in your own parliament or government. They've signed up to those things, and that is difficult for those countries, but I suppose if you're going to have a single currency, you do need some of those elements. The third element where more work needs to be done is competitiveness. We've got to have a situation in the Eurozone where the countries with big trade deficits, never mind their budget deficits, whether that is Spain or Portugal or Greece, can actually see a way of trading out of those deficits and existing in a single currency with a country as strong as Germany. And that's where Britain also does have an important influence, because that is about driving the single market, completing the single market in energy and services, having competitive labour markets, all of which we can still press for very much at the European Union level. That's the menu of things that need to be done. I think some good progress has been made. As I say, I wish colleagues well in the euro. While that there were strong disagreements in the discussions we had tonight, it was good-natured. It was people understand each other's national interests and positions, and working relationships will be maintained and will work well. But at the end of the day, my judgment was what was on offer wasn't good enough for Britain, so better to have those countries in a treaty on their own. So I have one last question from here.
Anton LaGuardia of The Economist. In what way will Britain be better able to defend its interest in the single market if all these countries decide, for example, to have financial services regulation at 23 or labour market regulation at 23? Will you hold hostage access to the ECJ or the European Commission, which are institutions that they would like to use?
Well, clearly the institutions of the European Union belong to the European Union. They belong to the 27. They're there to do the things that are set out in the treaties that we've all signed up to over the years. And that is an important protection for Britain. And obviously, in terms of financial services, we do have concerns about what the European Commission has been doing particularly recently. We don't think it's pro-competitive. We think it's been discriminatory. We think there are some issues and problems, and the single market and the institutions of the single market are the right way to protect and defend against that. And this comes back to this whole issue of, is it better to have a new treaty within a treaty, a group of countries within the 27 using the institutions of the European Union, constructing a new legal structure, and having the institutions serving two masters at the same time within the same structure? In my view, that's only worth it if you can get proper safeguards. We couldn't get those safeguards, so better to allow those countries to do their thing on their own and keep the European Union focused on what matters for Britain, which is the single market, trade, investment, and the rules that flow from that. Thank you very much. I think I'm going to take a short break before returning for the Croatian accession, which I think we're celebrating in about 3 hours' time. Thank you very much indeed.